Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Game of Crowns from AEG, a game that is absolutely, positively not trying to make any kind of association with a certain popular fantasy franchise out there, and if you accuse them of that, you're just ridiculous. Okay, we'll talk more about that in my final thoughts. Game of Crowns is, as it says on the box, a game of diplomacy and betrayal, which sounds very epic, but really it's a card game. It's a card game about trying to get points in a variety of different manners by getting different sets. Certain cards give you points based on other cards that you have in hand. You can exchange cards, you can battle other people, but the battling is all about just taking more cards. Sound a bit weird? It's a bit weird. Let's go ahead and do a brief look at how the game is played. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think.
Alright, let me run you through Game of Crowns. This is a typical setup for, well, it's a typical setup for one player. I'm trying to keep this short so you just have to picture that there will be multiple other players. I think at least 3 players, and it goes up to 9 players, but I don't recommend that at all. But every player is going to have these cards with their crests on it. They're going to have 2 cards that they keep off to the side that have their crests on the back, and then have attacker and defender on the other side. Keep those to yourself, and then you're going to have a set of 10 cards that have your crest on the bottom of the facing side of the card, but the 10 cards that you have are exactly the same as every other player. You're also going to start off with these, with 4 of these. Well, they're supposed to be Raven tokens, but everyone calls them penguins, so fair enough. Everyone gets 4 of those. You're going to take the round tracker card and use one of the penguins to keep track of the rounds of the game. It only takes place over 3 rounds. At the end of the game, whoever has the most victory points after those 3 rounds is going to be the winner. Now, I should mention, on the other side of this round tracker, is for one of the variants, you can go for 6 rounds. Trust me when I tell you, after you play it once at 3 rounds, you'll be very grateful that you made the decision to play these shorter amount of rounds. You also have a deck of guest cards. These are cards that they have the same back as your player cards because they're going to go into your hands, but they are not tied to any particular player. There's a deck of random sort of victory condition cards. Now, how this game works, it's essentially a set collection game of trying to get points in various ways. You're going to choose who's going to go first, and then you're going to go in turn order. On your turn, you have only 1 action, which means that over the course of the game, you're only going to take a total of 3 actions. Now, for that action, you only have 2 options. One of them is to make an exchange. I'm going to go through what all the cards do, but let me just tell you how these different actions work. One of them is to make an exchange. When you choose to make an exchange, you're going to take 1 card from your hand of cards, which if you had claimed guest cards at some point, you could even put those down as well. Doesn't really matter. It just has to be a card from your hand. You'll put down 1 card from your hand, and you'll say something like, okay, I'm going to put up a feud. I need traders. Okay? That's what I'm looking for. Then every player around the table, starting clockwise from you, they must put down one of their cards from their hand. And then they can say whatever they want, like, they can say, well, I'm not interested in trading, so I'm going to put down something you don't want. Or they can say, okay, I'll put down the trader that you want. Or they could say, I'm going to put this down, which I think that you want, even though it's not exactly what you asked for. Then when it gets all the way back around to you who started making the exchange, you could either stop right there and say, okay, I'm going to make an exchange. Because once you commit to making an exchange, you must make an exchange. So you can stop there, or you can give people the opportunity to sweeten the pot by putting ravens together with the card that they're offering to you. Ravens being a form of currency, which we'll get to why they're useful in a little bit. But what you could also do after your first time around is double down and say, well, okay, how about a feud and a coinage for a trader? Actually, that'd be a stupid thing to do. How about a feud and a castellan for a trader? Then it's going to go around again, and once again, every player is compelled to put down a second card, whether they want to or not. Then when it gets back around again, you can't put down another card, but you can sweeten the pot with ravens, including, I think, the player who made the choice to start the exchange could even sweeten their own pot with ravens, I think. The rule's a little bit unclear on that. But regardless, once everyone has made, once you've gone around, chosen to stop or not at any given point, you must make an exchange. You pick one player and you swap back and forth, and then that's it. Each player takes their new cards back into hand, and then play goes to the next player. Alternatively, your other option for the action you take on your round is simply to play a card. Now, really, there's only like 3 cards that have actions on them, but you'll play that card, take whatever the action is, and then that's it. You're done, goes to the next player. Obviously, there's a little more nuance in that, so let's go through what the cards actually do in this game. So first off, you have the Castellan. What the Castellan says is that at the end of the game, you gain 1 victory point for each Raven token that you have. It's as simple as that. If you have more Castellans, each one of them will kick off those points. The feud says that at the end of the game, you gain 1 victory point for each feud that you have if you have the most feud cards. Now, the thing about this game is that it's friendly ties. If more than one player has something, whether in this case it's feud cards, then you each get the maximum amount of points. Coinage is one of the action cards, meaning that you can actually do something with it as your action. You can play the coinage card, and if you play the coinage card, you exchange a card at random from another player's hand with this coinage. Now, this is important because in the rulebook, there is a rule that directly contradicts what the coinage card does, but according to AEG, you're supposed to do what it says on the card. The trader, at the end of the game, you gain a victory point for each coinage that you have. How about that? The princess says that at the end of the game, you gain a victory point for each knight that you have. And finally, the most complicated card in the game, kind of, sort of, is the knight card itself. Now, when you play the knight card, you must attack another player. You choose another player, and you are engaging in combat with them. However, I will note that if you had exchanged knights with someone else at some point, or various people had exchanged knights, you can never be attacked by your own knight. In other words, you're kind of lending them your knight. So you can't be attacked by a knight that has your crest on it. And when you use a knight, it is the only card that goes out of the game altogether. It's done. It's used up. Now, if you choose to make an attack, you choose one other player, and then simultaneously, you're considered to be the attacker. But simultaneously, every player is going to take one of their attacker or defender cards and put it face down. You are essentially not only betting on which player you think is going to win, but you're kind of you're bolstering them. You want that player to win, and you're aiding them as well. Although it is interesting, you can bet against yourself. If you're the attacker, you can put down the defender card because you want to lose. It sounds weird, and it is weird. There's some reasoning behind it, but not much. How this is going to work, once everyone is chosen, everyone flips over their card. Every card that is in the attacker's favor adds 1 point to the attacker. Every card that is in the defender's favor adds 1 point to the defender. Ties go to the attacker when determining the victor. However, once everyone's flipped over their cards, starting with the defender and working their way around, you have the option of sweetening the pot with ravens. Every raven on a card adds to that side's total, so that's another point in the defense's favor, and so on. Everyone can do that. Now, here's where it gets dumb. I know I'm spoiling my final thoughts, but there is no incentive whatsoever for people who are not directly involved in the combat to help. The only incentive is, I really don't want that person to get a card or something like that. That is it. Now, for the 2 people that are actually engaged in the combat, the potential spoils are this. If you are the victor, and the victor is not necessarily the attacker, it is whoever wins the combat, whether that was the defender or the attacker. Whoever is the victor gets to either take a card from that person's hand, and when I say from their loser's hand, and when I say take a card, I mean they literally get to take the entire hand of cards and pick the one that they want. Or they can take one of the guest cards out of the stack. Whoever is the loser, however, as compensation, gets every raven that was submitted in the attack, I believe, including the ones that they submit, and all of the allies. That's another reason why there's not a real reason for anyone else to help out in a battle. But let's go ahead and take a look at those guest cards since I brought them up. The guest cards go into your hand like normal cards, and they're all about victory point conditions. So the Diplomat says at the end of the game, you gain a victory point for each card you have from a different player. The Priest says that at the end of the game, you gain 3 victory points for each set of Castellan, Princess, and Trader that you have. The Artist says that at the end of the game, you gain a victory point for each princess in both adjacent players' hands. And the Undertaker says that at the end of the game, you gain 3 victory points if you have fewer cards than all other players. There's other ones besides that, but you get the general idea. So that's the game. that's really it. I mean, after you've done an attack, you take your spoils, you go back to doing what you were doing. You can either exchange a card or play a card on your turn. There's not a lot you can do as far as playing cards go, but that's generally it. You want to try to have the most points possible by the end of the game, however you choose to do that with the cards that you have. That is Game of Crowns. Let's get to my final thoughts.
All right, well, right off the bat, the name is absurd. The name is so stupid. And I hate to nitpick about this too much because it is just the name of the game. It's not the game itself. Okay. But I don't know how this got out of committee because I understand that you want to associate yourself with a bigger and badder game or a bigger and badder franchise. Totally get that, but it's just silly. It's so silly that you would expect that the game itself would be silly and that the rest of the theme and the artwork would just be ridiculous. But that is so not the case. They went out of their way to give a backstory to this game. It's on the back of the box. There's 2 pages in the rulebook at least dedicated to the backstory of the clans that I've never heard of. And I don't even know if this is from some other franchise. Maybe. It almost sounds like they took a bunch of backstory from a legit book series and slapped it in here. But why name it Game of Crowns? I don't know. That was just a bad choice, I think. And then the problem is that the game is not thematic at all, really. I mean, we'll talk more about this when we get to the actual gameplay mechanism and what's going on there. But the game is just about swapping cards back and forth, so it feels like all that backstory is wasted. Having said that, the positive, bright note about the presentation is that the artwork is beautiful. From the art on the box to the art on the cards, it looks fantastic. Having said that, this box is ridiculously oversized for how many cards and what stuff is in there. AEG likes to put out little card games in their little clamshell boxes. That started with Love Letter. Love Letter was like the inspiration for these small games, and then they put out a ton of them now. Why not this one? This game easily could have fit into one of those, and there was no reason to make this big of a presentation other than they wanted it to look good on the shelf. And it certainly does, especially together with the stupid name. It definitely catches your attention. So I guess that was the point, but I don't think that it's going to do them any favors when people actually play the game. But okay, I'm jumping ahead a bit. To be sure, there's a lot of interesting things potentially going on in Game of Crowns, and I think that that's the problem with this game. There's a lot of great ideas here that never really come to fruition. The game says right on the box it's a game of diplomacy and betrayal and just trying to work for and against. I mean, work with and against the other players to give, and it gives it like this epic feel, like wow, this is going to be like the Game of Thrones. Oh, I said it. I said that which should not be named, but the Game of Thrones board game where there's all this political maneuvering and making deals and alliances. Yeah, I guess you kind of can do that in this game, but the game never incentivizes you to do that at all. This is a set collection card game. That's what it is. This is all about just getting cards that bounce off of other cards that give you a lot of points. Get a bunch of coins if you have traders. Get a bunch of ravens if you have the Castellans, and so on. And there's a deck of guest cards which are completely random and not anywhere near as good as the cards that you have in your hand that can just give you a lot of points. Like, there's no reason to not go for the feud cards as over, or to choose not to go for the feud cards as opposed to like the jesters in the deck. Like, who cares? Some of the guest cards, it's implausible that they'll even happen, like the Gravekeeper card. But I'm kind of digressing, but the whole point is that's the game. The game is just deciding like which cards you think you want to go after in order to get the most points. It's just really simplistic. You either exchange a card on your turn or you play a card. But exchanging a card is kind of silly because most of the time people are not going to be willing to trade with you because they've already decided what they're doing. Sometimes you get lucky, but you're going to put a card out there, and most of the time people are going to say, well, you asked me that you want traders, but I don't want to give you my traders. Like, I might want to keep my traders, and why would I help you out? So here's coinage. Or, no, well, coinage would be a bad example for that, but here's feuds. Well, I don't want feuds. Well, okay, tough. You decided to try and make an exchange, so you're going to have to take something. Maybe you could double down and hope that someone else puts out another thing, but chances are they're not, which means you're giving up 2 good cards for junk probably, because you're going to end up just settling for something you never really wanted to begin with. And then you could boost it up with ravens, but again, most of the time, nothing that's out there is going to be that appealing, so why would you waste your Ravens on that? Combat is the most problematic thing in this game. It seems cool at first. Decide who you're going to attack. Everyone then votes on who they want to win, including the 2 players who are actually involved in the combat. Okay, that's interesting. You get different rewards if you win or if you lose, and you might want to take, advantage of that and maybe even bet against yourself. Great idea, but it is such a poor execution. First off, there's no reason for the other players to care at all who wins. Because, you might say, well, what if one player is clearly ahead and you don't want them to win that badly? But each player gets something, whether it's a ton of Ravens or whether it's just a card. And most of the time, getting more Ravens is actually better. So what do you do in that situation? It's almost, you just throw up your hands and say, well, either one of them winning sucks for me, so why would I do anything? I'm certainly not going to give them Ravens. I'm not going to use those at all. It just gets into this really weird place where you feel like there should be more haggling and negotiation and back and forth between the other players, but there's no reason to do so. The game does not encourage that at all. And the rest of the cards are certainly... And by the way, use your knight once, it's gone. So that gets into a weird area. Once you've used your knights, you're just kind of sitting there, and the other players can just the other players probably learn from their mistakes and are not going to attack because they just saw that it wasn't really worthwhile. And again, assuming that you come out on the winning end, which is, even though getting Ravens is really good, it is better to win and to be able to get another card. It is really not worth it to go for those guest cards. You want to go for someone else's card because it will potentially screw them, and it will potentially just give you more points because the cards that you start off with are worth more than the dumb guest cards. Okay, I don't like this game, as you can probably tell. And I would say that I'm really more disappointed than anything. I didn't expect much from a game with a silly name, and that was obviously just a cash grab based off of that. But when I read the rules, I'm like, whoa, that's really interesting. I don't mind set collection card games, and it looks like there could be an opportunity for a lot of interesting negotiation and backstabbing between the other players. But no, there's really none of that. This is just, hey, maybe I'll get lucky and get the card that I need. Either from taking it from you, and by the way, the rest of you can pretend that you're participating in this battle, but it doesn't really matter. So, lots of grand ideas, and nothing comes of them. That is the best way I can describe Game of Crowns from AEG.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.